Michelle Obama leaned forward at the Education Policy Summit and pointed her finger at Vivek Ramaswamy with moral authority. "You're nothing but a privileged minority attacking public education," she declared with passionate conviction. Obama's elite establishment audience nodded approvingly, thinking their former First Lady had delivered the perfect social justice takedown. But what Obama didn't know was that Vivek had researched her entire $70 million Netflix empire and elite private school hypocrisy. Vivek's response about Obama's fake advocacy career would completely destroy her credibility and expose the ultimate elite hypocrite. The National Education Association's annual summit was taking place at the luxurious Ritz-Carlton in downtown Chicago, bringing together education policy leaders, teachers' union representatives, and progressive activists to discuss the future of American public education. The elegant ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers and marble columns, provided an ironic backdrop for discussions about educational equity and serving underserved communities. The panel discussion titled Educational Equity in the 21st Century, Breaking Down Barriers and Building Opportunities, featured several high-profile figures discussing how America's education system could better serve minority and low-income students. It was supposed to be a showcase of progressive commitment to educational justice and social equity. Michelle Obama sat at the panel table with a grace and authority that had made her one of America's most beloved political figures during her time as First Lady. Her perfectly styled appearance and eloquent speaking manner projected the image of someone who had successfully used her platform to advocate for educational opportunity and social justice. Since leaving the White House, Obama had built her post-political career on education advocacy, children's health initiatives, and social justice causes that had made her a powerful voice for progressive values. Her memoir and Netflix productions had established her as a cultural icon who transcended politics to become a moral authority on issues affecting American families. Across the panel table sat Vivek Ramaswamy, who had been invited to provide perspectives on educational innovation and school choice policies. He wore a sharp navy suit, his demeanor calm but alert, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had built successful businesses while maintaining strong views on educational reform. The panel had proceeded through various discussions about funding equity, teacher training, and closing achievement gaps. Most of the conversation had been predictably progressive, with panelists offering familiar talking points about systemic inequality and the need for increased government investment in public education. That's when Obama decided to make her move. She had been observing Vivek throughout the discussion, clearly viewing him as a representative of conservative education policies that she believed threatened public education and educational equity. Obama sensed an opportunity to establish her moral authority when the conversation turned to school choice and educational alternatives. "I think we need to have an honest conversation about the attacks on public education that we're seeing across the country," Obama began, her voice carrying that familiar tone of moral authority that had made her speeches so compelling during her time as First Lady. "We have people in positions of influence who are using their platforms to undermine the very institutions that provide opportunities for children who don't have the advantages that some of us have had." The setup was classic Obama, using her moral gravitas to frame the discussion in terms of social justice while preparing to challenge someone she viewed as representing elite attacks on public education. The audience of educators and activists leaned forward with anticipation, ready to hear their champion defend public education against conservative criticism. We have individuals who talk about educational choice and innovation, but whose real agenda is to defund public schools and privatize education in ways that would leave the most vulnerable children behind, Obama continued, her voice growing more pointed. People who use market-based rhetoric to justify policies that would create more inequality rather than less. The attack was becoming more specific, and everyone in the ballroom could sense that Obama was building toward a direct confrontation with Vivek, who had become known for his support of school choice and educational alternatives to traditional public schooling. "We have successful minorities who should be using their platforms to lift up public education, to support the teachers and schools that serve communities like the ones they came from," Obama said, her gaze beginning to settle on Vivek. "Instead, we see people who have forgotten their roots, who attack the very systems that could provide opportunities for the next generation of children who don't have the privileges they enjoyed. The audience murmured with recognition, understanding that Obama was preparing to challenge Vivek's educational positions and his authenticity as a voice for minority communities. "Vivek," Obama said, turning to face him directly, her voice carrying the full weight of her moral authority and cultural influence. "I have to ask you directly about your positions on education policy, because I think the children and families watching this discussion deserve to understand what you're really advocating for." The confrontation was now completely personal, and everyone in the ballroom could feel the energy shifting from policy discussion to moral judgment. "You've made statements attacking public education, criticizing teachers' unions, promoting school choice policies that would drain resources from public schools that serve the most vulnerable children," Obama continued, her voice rising with passionate conviction. "You represent exactly the kind of thinking that threatens educational equity and opportunity for children who depend on strong public schools." The moral dimension of the attack was clear, with Obama positioning herself as the defender of vulnerable children against elite policies that would harm their educational opportunities. "You're nothing but a privileged minority attacking public education," Obama declared, her voice echoing through the ballroom with the full authority of her cultural status. "You've forgotten where you came from, you've ignored the struggles of children who don't have the advantages you had, and you're using your success to promote policies that would deny educational opportunities to the next generation of minority children." The audience erupted in applause, clearly moved by Obama's passionate defense of public education against what she portrayed as privileged betrayal of community interests. But what Obama didn't realize was that she had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. She had assumed that her status as a beloved cultural figure and her reputation as an education advocate would be enough to intimidate someone she clearly viewed as a traitor to minority interests. She had no idea that she was about to confront someone who had done extensive research on her own elite lifestyle and the contradictions between her public advocacy and her private choices. "Mrs. Obama," Vivek said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made everyone in the ballroom pay attention, "I have tremendous respect for your advocacy for children and education. I really do. But I have to ask you something, and I think the educators and families in this room deserve to hear your answer." The tone of the confrontation was shifting, and Obama's confident expression began to falter slightly. She had expected Vivek to become defensive about his education policies or to offer some weak justification that would only make her attack look stronger. Instead, he was turning the tables and challenging her own authenticity. "You just called me a privileged minority who attacks public education and has forgotten where I came from," Vivek continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You suggested that I'm betraying minority children by supporting educational choice and innovation. You positioned yourself as the authentic advocate for educational equity and opportunity." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze steady and unwavering. "But I have to ask you, Mrs. Obama, what exactly in your own educational choices and lifestyle demonstrates the kind of commitment to public education that you're demanding from others? How do your own decisions about where to educate your children reflect the values you're lecturing me about?" The question hit the ballroom like a thunderbolt, and the audience fell into an uncomfortable silence. This wasn't how these panels usually went. Cultural icons were supposed to be able to deliver moral judgments without having their own choices questioned in return. "Because when I look at your family's educational decisions," Vivek continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom with unmistakable authority, "I don't see someone who demonstrates faith in the public education system you're asking others to support. I see someone who chose the most elite private schools available while lecturing others about their commitment to public education." He pulled out his phone, and the gesture was both theatrical and devastating. "Let me share some facts about your family's educational choices with this audience of public education advocates." Malia and Sasha Obama attended Sidwell Friends School, one of the most exclusive and expensive private schools in America. The ballroom was dead silent now, the atmosphere completely transformed from progressive celebration to shocked attention. Obama sat rigid in her chair, her earlier confidence evaporating as she realized where this was heading. Sidwell Friends charges over $48,000 per year in tuition, Vivek continued, consulting his phone. That's more than many families earn in total income, more than most public schools spend per student, more than many teachers earn in annual salary. While you were advocating for public education, you were choosing the most elite private education money could buy for your own children. The financial disparity was staggering, and everyone in the room could see the fundamental contradiction between Obama's public advocacy and her private choices. But here's what makes it even more revealing, Vivek said, his voice rising with conviction. Sidwell Friends isn't just expensive. It's exclusive in ways that contradict everything you just said about educational equity and opportunity for all children. The exclusivity revelation was particularly damaging because it highlighted how Obama's choices contradicted her stated values about educational access. Sidwell Friends has a student body that is overwhelmingly wealthy and white, Vivek continued. The average family income of students is over $300,000 per year. The school has extensive legacy admissions that favor children of alumni and donors. This isn't just private education, Mrs. Obama. This is elite education designed to maintain class distinctions and exclude the very children you claim to advocate for. The systematic exclusion inherent in Obama's school choice was being exposed, showing how it contradicted her rhetoric about educational equity. So when you attack me for supporting educational choice, Vivek said, I have to ask, what's more privileged? Supporting policies that would give working families the same kind of educational options you chose for your own children? Or choosing elite private education while attacking others for questioning the public school monopoly? The role reversal was devastating, showing how Obama's attack on school choice contradicted her own educational decisions. You called me privileged, Vivek continued, but let's talk about what real privilege looks like. Real privilege is being able to afford $48,000 per year for private school while lecturing others about their commitment to public education. Real privilege is choosing elite exclusivity for your own children while attacking educational choice for working families. The definition of privilege was being turned against Obama, showing how her lifestyle represented exactly what she claimed to oppose. But the private school choice isn't your only contradiction, Vivek said, pulling out another document. Let's talk about how you've monetized your advocacy for children and education. Let's talk about your Netflix deal and the fortune you've built while claiming to fight for educational equity. The attack was shifting to Obama's post-White House career and the commercialization of her advocacy. You signed a production deal with Netflix worth $65 million, Vivek continued, consulting his document. $65 million to produce content while claiming to advocate for children who attend schools that can barely afford basic supplies. The ballroom was completely captivated now, everyone recognizing the staggering contradiction between Obama's wealth accumulation and her educational advocacy. But it gets worse, Vivek said, his momentum building. Your memoir Becoming earned you an additional $65 million advance. Your speaking fees range from $200,000 to $400,000 per appearance. You've built a personal fortune of over $70 million while positioning yourself as an advocate for children from low-income families. The systematic wealth accumulation was being documented, showing how Obama had commercialized her public service and advocacy work. So let me ask you directly, Mrs. Obama, Vivek said, his voice taking on a tone of genuine incredulity. How do you justify making $70 million from your advocacy work while attacking others for supporting policies that would give working families educational choices? How do you reconcile building a media empire worth tens of millions while lecturing others about privilege and educational equity? The questions were devastating because they highlighted the fundamental contradiction between Obama's commercial success and her advocacy messaging. You attacked me for being a privileged minority who has forgotten where I came from, Vivek continued. But I actually support policies that would give minority families the same educational choices you made for your own children. I support school choice, educational innovation, and alternatives to failing public schools precisely Because I believe all children deserve the kind of opportunities you provided for Malia and Sasha. The policy contrast was stark, showing how Vivek's positions actually aligned with Obama's choices rather than her rhetoric. But your approach does the opposite, Vivek said, his voice becoming more pointed. You chose elite private education for your own children while opposing school choice for working families. You built a $70 million fortune from your advocacy while attacking successful minorities who support policies that would democratize educational access. The systematic hypocrisy was being exposed, showing how Obama's positions contradicted both her choices and her supposed values. And let's talk about the schools you're defending, Vivek continued, pulling out what appeared to be his most damaging evidence. While you were choosing Sidwell Friends for your children, public schools in Chicago, your supposed hometown, were failing minority children on a massive scale. The local failure was particularly damaging because it highlighted Obama's disconnection from the communities she claimed to represent. Chicago public schools have some of the worst achievement gaps in the country, Vivek said, consulting his document. Minority students consistently perform below grade level. Graduation rates are abysmal, and violence in schools puts children's safety at risk every day. The systematic failure of public education in Obama's supposed community was being documented, showing the disconnect between her advocacy and local reality. But instead of supporting innovations that might help these children, Vivek continued, you attack school choice policies that would give their families the same options you exercised when you chose elite private education for your own children. The denial of choice to others was being highlighted as the ultimate form of privilege and hypocrisy. You want to know what educational equity really looks like? Vivek asked, his voice rising with conviction. It's giving all families the same choices you had. It's supporting innovations that break the monopoly of failing schools. It's recognizing that children's futures shouldn't depend on their zip code or their family's ability to afford $48,000 per year in private school tuition. The positive vision of educational equity through choice was a stark contrast to Obama's defense of the status quo that had failed so many children. Educational equity isn't defending a system that traps poor children in failing schools while wealthy families choose private alternatives, Vivek continued. It's creating options, fostering innovation, and empowering families to make the best decisions for their children's futures. The ballroom was completely silent now, everyone absorbing the systematic exposure of Obama's contradictions and the alternative vision of educational reform that Vivek was presenting. So, Mrs. Obama, Vivek said, beginning to conclude his response, the next time you want to attack someone for being a privileged minority, maybe you should examine your own choices and ask whether your $70 million media empire and elite private school decisions represent authentic advocacy or elite hypocrisy. He gathered his thoughts for his final statement. And the next time you want to lecture someone about educational equity, maybe you should consider whether defending a failed system while choosing elite alternatives for your own children represents the kind of leadership that actually helps the children you claim to champion. His final words would echo in that ballroom long after the panel was over. I'll keep supporting policies that give all families the educational choices you exercised for your own children. You can keep building your media empire while defending a system that fails minority children every day. The silence that followed was profound and complete. Obama sat motionless in her chair, her moral authority completely destroyed by the exposure of her elite lifestyle choices and the contradictions between her advocacy and her actions. Her attack on educational choice had backfired spectacularly, revealing her own privilege while highlighting the authenticity of Vivek's reform positions. The audience sat in stunned silence, many clearly recognizing that they had just witnessed a fundamental challenge to the moral authority of progressive elites who lived by different standards than those they advocated for others. The confrontation between Vivek Ramaswamy and Michelle Obama had exposed something crucial about progressive education advocacy: the willingness of elite figures to defend failing systems while choosing elite alternatives for their own families, and the hypocrisy of attacking educational choice while exercising exactly that choice through private school selection. It had highlighted how celebrity advocacy often masked elite privilege and lifestyle choices that contradicted the very policies being promoted to working families. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that all the cultural authority in the world couldn't overcome the simple truth that authentic advocacy required living by the principles being promoted, and that children's educational futures were too important to be sacrificed to political ideology or elite hypocrisy. The age of unquestioned celebrity advocacy authority was over. The age of demanding consistency between public positions and private choices had begun. And it had started with an entrepreneur from Ohio who had the courage to challenge a cultural icon with the most powerful weapon in American discourse: the truth about elite hypocrisy and the courage to advocate for policies that aligned with rather than contradicted the choices successful people made for their own families.